Hey class, welcome back. Check out the notes behind me for week 15. Next week, week 16, will be pretty much straight out of chapter 5 in the textbook when we talk about the different parts of a cell. This week we're going back, as we always do, on some of our previous notes, and we're hashing some of the things on pollution, some of the things on radioactivity. Remember, you should always keep a good up-to-date notebook. We have our notes every single week put out there on pacificascience.org, the website up here, and then your Google Classroom. So let's jump on in, try and get it to about 10 minutes here. We started off with this quote by Dr. Sanjay Gupta from CNN. It says, "No amount of science can rescue us from ourselves." I'd like you to think about that in terms of both the vaccine and the masks that they're talking about right now for COVID-19, which is why we're doing this distance learning. And also when we're talking a little bit more about pollution. We're going to talk about a different kind of pollution today. Remember, you can't keep pollution anywhere contained on the planet. It spreads very quickly. We've been talking about radiation, and today is a good chance to talk about radioactive contamination, radioactive pollution. The date today is going to come into play, December 7th. First of all, we start with the brain pop. Mark Watney, the fictional astronaut that's up on Mars, is trying to survive by using potatoes to supplement his meager rations that he has up there. He doesn't have enough protein, as we'll see later on, and that will come into play later on Thursday when we see that he's kind of wasting away a little bit without enough protein up there, but he does have potatoes, and that's why we started with plants, and we did a brain pop on plants. Remember, we're going now in detail into the 6 kingdoms. We're going to start at the cells and work our way up and talk about how the 6 kingdoms function. And in particular, plants right here, the words in the boxes are our vocabulary terms for this week. So the brain pop talked about flowers, fruit, and seeds. Now, he plants his potatoes using a tuber, a little bit of the root, not an actual seed. We'll talk a little bit about why that might be the case. Remember, a seed is just an undeveloped plant. It's got some food in there to get that plant going, and planting seeds is one of the things, if we were in class together, we'd be planting some seeds this week. I would really encourage you to get a potato, and I'll put this out on a pitcher, but a potato and a couple of toothpicks, set it in some water. You can wash a potato, develop on your own. Current events, December 7th. Let's see how this ties in right here. December 7th, 1941, this date in history, the United States was drawn into World War II when the Empire of Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Now, I visited Pearl Harbor a couple of years ago. Really just an incredible tour out there. It's important to talk, again, social studies, a little tie-in there about the U.S. being drawn into World War II, but also when we're talking in this class about radiation and isotopes, we talked already about how radiation can be dangerous. It can cause mutations in DNA. Now, the alpha particles that are bumping off of the inside of the cab where Mark Watney's hanging out, those aren't dangerous by themselves when they're just running into things. They've got kinetic energy and they're heating things up. But if you're going to breathe them in, they would be dangerous. You get that radiation inside your body, that's when it causes things like the cancers, for alpha particles anyway. Gamma rays can go right through your skin and they can cause cancers that way. Alpha particles aren't really that dangerous unless you breathe them in. Let's look at the story of pollution and how it relates to World War II. 1945 marked the end of World War II. It was when Nazi Germany was defeated, the Empire of Japan was defeated. At the end of World War II, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs. The only time atomic bombs have ever been used in war. Hopefully they will never be used again. Absolutely horrible, horrible events. Each one destroying an entire city in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We could do an entire unit on just that. But the long and the short of it is, after World War II and the atomic age started, the United States, at this time, the only country with nuclear weapons, with working nuclear weapons, although the Soviet Union would soon get them later. They kept testing them. They said, okay, we've got 2 working ones. You may have heard the Manhattan Project. They get this thing working at the Trinity test site, famously in New Mexico. And they kept testing above ground atomic tests in the Nevada desert. A really weird time in America. In other words, people would go out to Las Vegas and they would literally announce very often when a bomb test was going to happen. People would set up grandstands and look at the sky and see the sky light up with these atomic bombs that are blown up above ground. You may have remembered, for example, a silly scene from an Indiana Jones movie where he gets stuck in this artificial town that they had created with mannequins and houses and such. And the government would actually do this to test different structures, strength, different distances from where they would light off these bombs. somewhat unbelievable that we actually did this. We didn't just test them in the Nevada desert, we also did it in some islands in the Pacific. The point here with pollution and radioactive pollution is this. You remember some of the isotopes, the radioactive isotopes we talked about, in particular iodine. When these bombs are exploded in the Nevada desert, it doesn't just stay there. The wind carries it from west to east across the United States, usually, although different wind patterns, of course, shift with the weather. Let's look at one situation with this pollution affected children. It actually caused cancers. A certain number of cancers were caused by this. You've got iodine, radioactive iodine, drifting across the United States, settling down in places where cows might graze. When it would settle down in places where cows are grazing in the grasses, the plants, the cows then eat the grasses. They end up giving milk that is slightly radioactive. What do you do with the milk? Well, if you have cereal, you're pouring that milk in your cereal, you're drinking the milk, you're pouring the milk into your oatmeal or your Cheerios, and you would get radioactive iodine collecting, particularly in the thyroid gland of children. Mention everybody, of course, would be affected by this. Children especially are much more affected by radioactive iodine than adults, and this was causing a definite number of cancers in the United States. Fortunately, finally, in the 1960s, the United States got the clue. We entered into a deal with the Soviet Union at the time, and we stopped above ground nuclear testing. However, we still test all the time underground. As a matter of fact, one of my things I used to do in college was check out the seismograph. That was part of my job there at Diablo Valley College, and you would see underground nuclear tests when they would happen. You would actually see a little tiny earthquake that was produced by an underground nuclear test in Nevada. So we still test atomic weapons all the time. Fortunately, not above ground anymore, but still, it's unbelievable that we had hundreds of bombs that we would release radiation in the atmosphere, would rain down again somewhere, and end up causing tangible pollution and cancers across the country. From there, we went in a little bit more detail about plants and fungus. This is a classic symbiotic relationship around 450 million years ago. Plants and fungus decided, hey, wait a second, we can do better if we work together. This is symbiosis, living together, and in this case, it's mutualism. The roots of the plant, depicted here, of course, the lines going down into the ground, come together with the hyphae, which you can think of it as roots of a fungus. When you see a little mushroom on the surface, you're just looking at the fruiting body, a tiny, tiny, tiny part of a much larger organism. The roots of the plants, because of photosynthesis, you probably remember that, you hopefully remember that, are giving the fungus sugars, and in turn, the mushroom that you see at the top, part of that larger fungal organism, is giving the plants nutrients and helping them collect water from the soil. The nutrients being specifically things like calcium, phosphorus, nitrogen, and also bacteria fix nitrogen. Bacteria, we'll see that on Thursday, pull nitrogen out of the air. Plants can't just breathe in the nitrogen that's in the air. They need bacteria to help them process the sugars that they make. Really important that we get back to the idea that soils are very different than dirt. Soils are this incredibly complex living ecosystem. So if you look at fungus and plants, they are living through mutualism. They're helping each other out. There are other types of symbiosis that we want to mention. One is commensalism. This is when one organism is benefiting from another one, but it doesn't really work both ways. For example, cows with birds that live on top of them, getting the bugs that the cows are kind of usually attracting. The cows don't really get that much help from the birds eating the bugs that are around them. The bugs don't bother the cows that much, but the birds aren't hurting the cows either. Commensalism means they're living together, but usually one member of this pair is getting much more out of the relationship than the other one. And finally, I'd like you to look one of these up for yourself. I'm going to give you one example here. Parasitism, parasites. When you look at a parasite, the one example I give is from backpacking. You know, I love backpacking in the Sierra Nevada. And one thing that you really got to watch out for is this protist called Giardia. You've probably heard of it. This is why, remember, if you go back a few weeks, we talked a little bit about it. You boil your water when you go camping, or you use a really good filter, or you use iodine tablets. There are parasites. Again, they're one-celled organisms that take up residence in your gut, kind of gross. And if you check out the parasite Giardia, it doesn't help you at all. It helps itself. And so this is one thing where it's getting the benefit and you are not. Makes you extremely sick if you drink some bad water, say from a creek or something like that, where some livestock may have been there before you. You won't even know you're sick for usually 2 or 3 weeks, and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, I don't feel so good. And this one-celled organism is taking up residence in your stomach. We fortunately have a treatment for it, but it is definitely something to be avoided. Finally, when you check out potatoes, bringing social and cultural and science all together, that's what we're trying to do. We are also condensing 5 days into 2. So there's a lot up on this board. But remember, it's all about the way things come together. In the movie, Mark Watney plants potatoes. Now, potatoes are a tuber. Look that up. That's one of our vocabulary terms. It's just a kind of a fattened part of the root. When he plants these, they are not seeds. Now, potato plants do make seeds, but instead he's using tuber. This is the way we usually plant potatoes. Why? Why do you think we do this? They're all clones when we do it this way. What might be the advantage of that? Well, you know what you're going to get. There's not going to be much variety. In other words, all of those potatoes that you pull out of the ground are clones of each other. You know exactly what you're going to get. That's the advantage of that. That's one of our answers up here. And a quick tie-in with social studies. I know that you've got, for example, maybe Ms. Merlot or Mr. Westbrook, and you're talking about social studies. One of the biggest things that happened in the 16th century, the conquistadors brought back potatoes to Europe. Now, yeah, you always hear about them looking for gold, and you always hear about them coming and conquering Central and South America. However, they brought back one of the most important crops for Europe. It's a good and a bad thing. In Europe, they very, very quickly realized that potatoes were incredibly easy to grow. They grow in poor soil. They are fantastic at staying in the ground until just when you want to eat them, you pull them out of the ground and you cook them up. In Ireland in particular, they really depended on one potato crop, one type of potato, one particular type. This, you might remember, might be great in the short term for food, but you might remember that little silly thing we did with fuzzy wuzzits and variety. You need variety not only in life to make things survive, but you need variety in your crops. We actually in the world right now depend on a very small number of crops for our existence. Europe, this is a classic example of depending on just one crop. And in the case of Ireland, when a blight hit, and notice that blight is one of our vocabulary terms, a blight is a fungus that specifically attacked, in this case, this fungus specifically, attacked potato plants. When this blight hit, destroyed the potato crops, and this is a terribly tragic situation in terms of the way it was handled in Ireland, the way the English and the did not get enough food to Ireland at the time. The blight in Ireland killed about 1 million people, and another 1 million left Ireland entirely to try and get either to the United States. In some cases, they actually even tried to get themselves arrested and sent to Australia, where they would at least be fed, because Australia at the time was a penal colony. So if you look at the tie-ins between like fungus, food, blight, and social issues, these things all come together. That's one of the things about this class that we're trying to make a through statement about the entire year. Remember what John Muir said, you can't study one thing without realizing that it's tied to everything else. So, recap our vocabulary terms. I'll write them up and they'll be up there online, but they're all the boxed ones here this week. A little tie-in with everything from World War II and nuclear testing to plants and fungus. So I know it's covering a wide range of stuff. Remember, we're getting 5 days down to 2. The most important thing, of course, is our Wednesday recap test. That'll be out there online today by the end of the day. And our Tuesday vocab, you get in the definitions of the boxed terms. Have a great week 15, everybody. I'll see you online next time. Take care. Bye-bye.